Ladies
and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Sikh Treasures. This is episode 2. Last time around we had an opportunity to meet our fantastic guests and they're back with us again. We've got Dr. Bhupinder Singh as well as Mr. Bhupinder Singh. Welcome to the show. So last time round we were really intrigued. We were talking about aha moments, the aha moments that you had when you went on this tour in Pakistan to visit all the Gurdwaras of the past, our Sikh heritage, but also you had an opportunity to visit, and you mentioned it before, the fact that some of your families had lived in those particular areas pre-partition, and there are still some communities that live there now. So let's talk a little bit about, you went off, and I love this phrase, off the beaten track, which effectively means that I can't imagine you being, like, hey, we're not going to be part of the party, we're radicals, let's get our own taxi, let's go and, investigate and find local villages where, you have some kind of historic reference in terms of your grandparents. And so you did that, right? You managed to find someone, you had some security with you as well, and I think you also went and visited a school too, didn't you?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that trip, this was a few days into the trip, you decided to do that?
So, as I said in the first program, the bucket list thing here is not just to visit Pakistan and see the Gurdwaras, but also to see the homelands of my great-grandparents. And actually what is not perhaps well known is there are two, there's Islamabad, and actually behind Islamabad, or if you like, the twin part, like we've got New Delhi and Old Delhi, the twin part of Islamabad is a place called Rawalpindi, which at the time of the British, that was the name of it. And right round that area, which was a very big trading hub. So it's a trading hub for, all the goods coming from, as I said, the Silk Route was one of the things, but also, the stuff that's been produced in that region all ended up in Rawalpindi. So a lot of our families were traders around those areas, and there must be, many villages darted around. And now I personally know, because I've done my family tree, that on my both sides of the family there were all these different parts where we were, and one place I did know for sure.
So you could trace the exact place, the exact
Correct.
part of the village where your family were. Yeah?
So
and the same with you as well, yeah.
Not so much. We didn't manage to visit all of those places,
but you knew the rough location.
Yeah. But the one thing I think Bhupinder would have learned is just basically the structure of what we were looking at, because we were passing by lots of villages,
cool.
And basically a lot of the names were known to us.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had identified. Let's go back to you. So you identified a particular area.
Correct.
Where your grandparents used to live.
So my dad was born in a place maybe 30 miles from the centre of Rawalpindi, although in Pakistan it takes a lot longer going around places. And that was a village at the time, probably a town now, called Bewal. And I then, because I knew my dad was born there, I then managed to speak to my great uncle in America, actually, who told me who to meet in the town.
Brilliant.
So the adventure we did when we went, basically we had a big party of other people, and we said, no, we're going to check all this terrain out for ourselves. And as part of that, we went on this tour in our own taxi, and that we had a tour guide actually who's not really a guide, he's a historian, and he's a Muslim guy, but he is very, very interested in Sikh background and culture, and he knew all sorts of things that other people wouldn't know because he'd actually studied the stuff. And he writes for the newspapers and things as well. That's what he does after that. And so I rang my uncle. My uncle, who's a bit frail, told me, go and meet, I think his name was Wasim Alia, or the name of the guy. And then I told this Ahmed, and Ahmed then just phoned up the different henchmen, head honchos of the village. We basically, he was on the phone all the time, because we then visited various other villages for other people in our party. But the second one we actually got to was Bewal. And it was an amazing experience. So en route, I think Bhupinder can tell you that en route he asked us to stop off a school. Do you want to just talk about the school
absolutely.
for a bit?
So just outside Rawalpindi, we just stopped at a school which Ahmed Ali, our guide, he really said, please come along and just meet the principal and the students at the school. So it was like I think it was not just primary, but going into secondary. So it was a small place, but it was a school where it was run by someone who was a karate champion in his own time. So he set up a school, and so what they would teach at this school is the first half an hour of school would be a karate lesson every morning.
Is that a regular school and this is extracurricular activity, or is it a dedicated school for karate?
Well, no, it's a regular school, but because it is run by someone who's got a karate background, he was teaching the kids karate first thing in the morning every day.
Get them warmed up.
And not just the boys. It was a majority of girls we saw in this school actually.
So he actually his school has produced Pakistan's only female karate champions.
Wow.
Yeah.
And basically, I think the point here is that he was showing us respect and saying, we want you to meet Sardars, meet some Sikhs, and meet some foreigners as well, to give them inspiration and tell them a bit about the history of that. Yeah, we were living here, so that they don't miss out on that bit of knowledge. So there's none of this kind of trying to hide old history. There's actually embracing us.
In a way, it's quite good as well. It's quite positive,
yes,
because what it's saying is that although it's now two separate countries,
yeah,
they're across the border, and there is a heritage. There is something that you need to remember about the past.
To be honest, we were like rock stars half the time. We went.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Wherever,
but that's just how.
No, but wherever we went, we were, before going, we were like practicing. Oh, do we have to say salam alaikum and so on when we meet people there? But wherever we went, people came up. Yeah, people came up. Sat Sri Akal, Sardarji.
It was a shock. It was a shock to us.
It really was. But the thing you've got to remember is that we met various people and said, oh, our family is from this place, and then we would get the response, oh, well, my family's from Amritsar or from Jalandhar. And so you've got to remember it's a two-way street. Partition affected a huge number of people. Both Sikhs,
3 million people.
Yeah, absolutely, and Muslims and Hindus and the like.
So how did you feel? And I asked you this question the other week, off camera, was you're with some of these people that you've met them, and I think in one case you went to their house and you were having like a really nice, was it some snacks and some Coca-Cola?
Well, maybe shall we tell you the story of how we got to that, and then we can tell you how we feel.
I'm just like, one of the things that you could hopefully cover is, did they say anything about who it was that caused all that kind of partition issues, between, in terms of the violence and everything else?
We heard various stories in different places that we went to, and I mean the underlying theme of many of the stories was that it was always a group of people from outside of that village that came and attacked Sikhs in this village, or and then at another place we heard that, in this village, the Sikhs were generally the well-to-do people, and there were often the money lenders as well, and so they may have that was another incentive, that there was a time of violence and people
were told that their debts would be removed.
Oh, so that was one of the.
That was another very. That was an aha moment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, something we didn't really understand.
So if we got rid of these people,
so for example,
our debts would be clear.
Correct. So if you look at, so we went to this village, which is really a town now called Bevel, and the guy made the arrangements, and we had literally 15 men and maybe 4 or 5 ladies who met the lady parts. That we had a few ladies with us in our group. They were met separately, according to Muslim or Pakistani tradition. I don't know, but we were greeted. We were given hars. Can you believe it? They only knew in the morning. They presented us hars. They presented us with fruit, drinks, all these things, and they were very softly spoken. Now these were, so I was meeting a very great old elderly gentleman who knew the name of my grandfather. He knew my great grandfather and knew all my grandfather's brothers and family.
Amazing, isn't it?
And he was, I think, what was he, 86 or something? I think his age was. He's an old guy, right? And he then told us about what happened during partition. And he also spoke very highly of our family. And we also saw my great-grandfather's house. And we saw the land that they rented from us, which is now rubble. My great-grandfather's house sort of exists, although I'm not sure what that was and what it is today, because the land that was rented seemed to be bigger than his house. So I'm finding, that he rented a sort of house there. But they told us, and it's absolutely great. And they said, we looked after these fields. This was where we lived, and they treated us with a lot of respect. And then we did, to answer your question, we specifically asked about what happened at the time of partition.
Right, and they were quite open to talk about it.
Oh, I think everybody said it was a terrible time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It was
absolutely. Yeah.
And actually, it's earlier than the partition that we think about. It's probably...
Well, in fact, a
discussions.
lot of the violence began in March. That's what we were told. And what we were always told is that it was always groups from other towns and villages that came and caused attacked people and so on. And in Bearville, in particular, it was very...
My great uncle in America, he said, maybe you don't want to see, right? And actually I felt sad because we went to a house which was basically the biggest house in town.
Right.
And it was done up on 4 floors and had satellite dishes and all the rest of it. And that was the location of the Gurdwara, which was like meters away from my great-grandfather's house.
So that's a Gurdwara, that's a
and
building that formerly was a Gurdwara.
Well, no, they've destroyed the Gurdwara. And actually it's a good thing they destroyed the Gurdwara, because in that particular Gurdwara, over 400 people were set alight.
Oh, okay.
So at the time of partition, all of the families were huddled together in that to protect themselves, but actually they were burnt alive. I don't know the full circumstance. I can ask my great uncle, but he just feels too cut up when he talks about it. But all I can tell you is, on the flip side of that, we saw the great people, and they said that that it was orchestrated. Now, the point that Bhupinder made earlier was really interesting. So in the case of my great-grandfather, we had fields, we had lands, and the local Muslim people were essentially kirayadar. They were renting or working on the land. So like their house was rented off us, and that did create envy. And also because there was money in the hands of the Sikh people. That was also
there were money lenders as well.
Yeah, because some of these people were resigned to serfdom effectively because they owed money, and that was so. If you were told, whether you're of our village or whatever village, you were told, well, you're going to be saved, all of your debts are free. It was a motivation for people.
Let's look at the other side of it, which is, and again we've spoken about this, off camera, which was when you went and when you go and visit some of these places, right? You'll see a well, you'll see certain facilities that are made for the community. And this is what I always find a bit of a problem when it comes to, obviously this is beyond the control of the people at the time when a rule was made about partition, about splitting it up. But they were communities that had lived together for so many generations, but they'd helped each other out. So when they build a well, they're not going to be saying, well, that well is not for anybody else in the family, it's just for us. That well is a community thing. So they've been doing things for communities to help them, right? What else would they have constructed? Wells?
So we were told by our historian that it was in the nature of the Sikh people to make things which were what you might call seva or community seva. So on the tree, as we drove on roads, whenever we saw a banyan tree, he says every banyan tree you see in this region has been planted by a Sikh family.
Wow.
Right? And they produced banyan trees so that if you were travelling, you're walking or going by cart, you could rest under shade. Sometimes they would run shops from there as well. So, if they were selling produce, they'd want to sell it under a banyan tree. He says all the mango trees are also not particularly, they have been planted generally by Sikhs at that time. And the other one was the peepal tree, which will be planted more near religious
I think I saw
things.
one of your pictures. Was that like a place like
it was like
a water area?
That's right. So
it's quite squarish as well.
Yeah,
I think you found one that was not quite looked after. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the sad thing about it. Like we mentioned that in some of the places we saw a pile of rubble, which used to be a house, and it's still 70 years on. It's still a pile of rubble, which is a bit sad.
Unheard of.
Yeah,
basically.
absolutely. So because there's no one really wanting to take responsibility for that, or there may be a question of ownership
Yeah.
as well. So we also saw, for example, a well and inside the well was an inscription in Gurmukhi. And when we looked at it, we said, "Oh, this is written in Punjabi." But the local Muslims said, "Well, that's not Punjabi because they can't read it because it's written in Gurmukhi."
Right.
Whereas in Pakistan, you have to realise that lots of people speak Punjabi, but they read it in the Shahmukhi script, in the Arabic style script.
When you're reading, when it's written form, it's an Arabic script. But when you read it back, it comes out in Punjabi.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to remember these small little differences where when you're there, they hit home to you really. And so, for example, we saw a well, and it was a little inscription giving the name of the person who built the well. He built the well in the memory of his wife. And then another place we went to, there was a great sort of bathing pool with a stepped entrance to the pool where people would have done sort of communal washing or washing of clothes and so on.
Also leisure activities.
And leisure activities. But
in
because there's a
right?
question, because there's a question of ownership and who owns it, who's going to look after it, who's going to pay for it, it was in disrepair. But the sad thing is, these villages that we went to, the couple of villages we went to, they were not in a good state. You know, and you think 70 years on, there should be improvement and so on. And what we were told that maybe 30 to 40% of the men of these villages have left and gone to the Middle East or to UK or Canada, and then they send back little bits of money, I guess. And I guess that makes doesn't give an incentive to the local people to
some of the fields, like for example, there might be amrud, there might be apple, apricot, all these things are grown there, right? But then some of them are just not used because they can't. This sounds really weird. They hope to get Afghani and migrant labour. Right, they want Afghani refugees to come and look after their land because they're too rich. I think this affects parts of the Punjab, but Punjab is, and the Indian side is more mechanized because the size of, the scale is different. Here we're talking about a hilly landscape where, orchards can grow, but you can't really grow lots of crops in the normal way.
Okay. What about industrial investment in terms of
there's nothing,
industry and that kind of thing, or factories and that? Is it
not
very
around
much
here.
barren land, you think?
It seemed like so, yeah. In those sorts of areas where that's, if a lot of the labour has left the place and tried to go abroad,
or they're urban. These are villages.
Yeah, right.
We saw my father's school, which was fantastic. They've got facilities like that, but we never saw anything. And we went through Gujar Khan. We didn't stop there. Very industrious place outside of Rawalpindi, and Rawalpindi obviously had factories and things as well, but nothing we saw very much here.
Not so much in the countryside. In the cities, they were well built and
where they make handicrafts in certain places.
I've got a final question for you.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. Personally, right, when you went back, and I know in the previous program we spoke about kind of the emotion that you felt when you went to the same place, that like a religious place where your family had been to before, generations upon generations. When you actually went to where they used to live, right? What was flowing through your mind? Did you walk through and go, hey, this is just amazing? Or what was the kind of thing that was going through your head, individually?
I think I was quite, in one sense, a bit sad that these places had not been developed. 70 years ago, they were prosperous little towns and so on.
Flourishing.
Yeah, or we hope they were.
Right.
But it seems like time has stood still for some of these places. Whereas you kind of think, well, if there was a big community there that wasn't uprooted and so on, they could have been quite prosperous areas.
Absolutely, and those communities working together as well, rather than the separation that exists right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think. It was very, very touching when we talked about the partition and all those things. It was very touching, but when you see a disused Gurdwara and it's bolted up, and I think Bhupinder's point here, there is some confusion, more so in Pakistan than in India, as far as I know, about who owns that land, because definitely Sikh type structures, buildings, they are there, but they're not really there. They're not really used. And sometimes they're right in the middle of the town. Now, Lahore, for example, we found Gurdwaras which had been converted and used. Here in the Rawalpindi side, that was not true. So it was quite a different thing. In fact, we saw a mandir that was being converted into a school in Lahore, all that kind of stuff, maybe because the value of the land is too high there. But here, we saw a mandir that was being used to feed farm animals.
Yeah.
So,
Very different, isn't it?
yeah, and it was sad, but at least in a way, it's good it's being used and not being demolished, because obviously after Ayodhya, all that kind of stuff that happened in India, they had started demolishing some of the stuff.
Right,
But
well,
luckily, our villages were protected in that sense.
So, we could talk on and on
Yeah,
about,
absolutely,
this is really very interesting, and thanks so much for, sharing your personal journeys, and especially it's quite difficult subject area as well to talk about, even
It's very sad, actually.
to your family as well, who will also be watching this too,
Mm.
and any others that would also be saying, because it's a thing that affected a lot of people, the
Absolutely,
partition and
yeah.
the separation. Okay, well that's it. That's all we've got time for this time round. Thanks for tuning in. Next time round, we will be back again with our wonderful guests, and we will be focusing in on the Gurdwaras that you visited, and tell us a little bit more about the differences, the similarities, and also more aha moments. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Why did you go, Carl?
So,